All right. So, hello everyone. Carlos again for another Evolve Talks. Today, I have the honor to be interviewing a friend and Evolve ambassador as well, Jamie Smith, who's a commerce expert. Let's put it this way: digital transformation and commerce expert. He's had a long career in the role of e-com. So, Jamie, welcome. Thanks very much for this. Perhaps we should start with the big picture. Tell us where you're at today. You were recently working for Akinon, and now you decided to start a new challenge. You're working as a consultant, so perhaps we can start there and talk about your career and what you've been doing throughout the years.
Sure, Carlos, and thanks for the invite to chat. I sort of my last sort of exciting challenge was I spent sort of 19 months with Akinon. Akinon are pretty much a little known e-commerce specialty vendor based out of Turkey, who are currently trying to grow their operation to look outside of the Turkish market because their heritage was sort of focused on their experience in retail, and their three founders formed an organization called Marcofoni, which was, for better term, for people who don't know who Marcofoni was, were at Amazon for Turkey and became one of the biggest marketplaces. And then they got acquired, and from that, things evolved. So with them, I was sort of working on strategy direction, helping them look at product, how the product was evolving as they were trying to learn to position their product in the market against the major players, people like BigCommerce and Magento and Commerce Tools and many others. And also helping them to build out things like solution consulting and looking at their partnerships division. Where I'm at now, I'm looking at new opportunities, primarily looking at things in the field of consulting or partnerships, and really trying to help clients to make the most out of their e-commerce platforms. That's what I've spent my sort of the last 3 decades pretty much doing. So that's sort of the highlight at the moment.
Yeah, nice. I can see here on your LinkedIn, and just for information, like these conversations are pretty much like a white slate, right? But you have spent 17 years of your career roughly at IBM, right? And here it says that you were an e-com solution strategist for this behemoth, if that's the right word in English, to get working with a company like Akinon. So what I find interesting about this conversation is IBM, as we know, and the word out there is that nobody gets fired for picking IBM.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, but how things evolved, like working from a corporation from like of that size, IBM, in terms of e-com. What do you see? It's the evolution today. I think that's an interesting conversation to be had. I'm not sure if IBM had their own e-com platform as well, like Oracle and stuff like that. So perhaps we could start there, really, like, and
sure. And I think it's a really interesting point when we talk about think about Evolve, the evolution of IT and what's happened. And I won't go through the whole background, but it gives some context. When I started with IBM back in 1993, it makes me feel old when I say that. I started as sort of a wet behind the ears student, really, doing a very specialized computer science degree with them, which they sponsored. And it was sort of a very small and elite group of people they took every year to be trained in everything IT. So my background is very, very diverse, from everything from designing microchips, electronics, networking, distributed network designs, right the way through into programming and the other things you do in IT. But my personal preference and why I ended up in e-com and why the industry and things have changed is my passion was always software. So effectively, IBM as an organization changed. It changed radically. You're right; it is a behemoth. The great book by Lou Gerstner, Even Elephants Can Dance. It really says everything, and the book is great. And I had a great privilege of meeting the man on a couple of occasions while he ran the ship of IBM. But the organization itself went through a number of big changes, and being in a big multinational corporate organization, it's about understanding the politics, understanding how to work the system, and you're really a very small cog in a very, very big wheel. When IBM decided to go into e-commerce, they went to e-commerce in 1996, and it was really the brainchild of Steve Mills, who at the time was the VP of software, and he wanted to do something different, and he got an agreement with the Olympic Commission to actually do a number of Olympics, but with a little known research project called Net.Commerce, and it had a previous name to that at the time, which was all C++. And it became a huge success, you know, through the end of the late 90s into the early 2000s. What was Net.Commerce, and why I actually moved from being in services and into being in software, and specifically into solution consulting, or pre-sales as it was then, was because I was an out-and-out expert in C++. And that's what the IBM what became WebSecCommerce was built in those days. And it transitioned from that to Java. And of course, the birth of WebSphere, which everyone knows is a brand. It's not a product. It's a house of about 90 odd products. It was at the time. It's probably evolved since then. And WebSphere was born. Now, like all things great, they start from the incubator of customer requirements. And actually, this is exactly where ATG and Hybris and all these really early, what everyone terms now monolithic, almost a bad language term, products came from. But they were built on needs. They weren't built just purely on think tank. You know, IBM invested tens of millions of dollars annually on customer feedback and alpha and beta programs and all these sort of things, which I had the great privilege of getting involved in and driving with clients, which meant the product evolved. But what happened to it, and hence the transition to where we are today, and I'm sort of trying to abridge it a little bit, is that as IT changed, needs changed. As the needs of industries required back then, and to your point, nobody got fired for buying IBM. You know, when we were in that sort of application space, when somebody wanted feature function richly on the ground as quickly as possible, these large scale monolith or applications, for a better term, really brought a benefit. And they still do today. You know, this is why ERPs have never become microservices, because to write an ERP as microservices is just complete folly, you know, and there's so much built within it. But in certain spaces like content and personalization, e-commerce is another one, all of these needed to be more agile, and the industry was changing. So, of course, when you look at smaller, or, you know, what we say is more modern technologies, Commerce Tools and Elastic Path, I put right at the top of the tree, being absolutely pure Lego brick microservice-based platforms. We needed to break away from the monolith. Now, that meant, you know, people like myself and other really smart technicians didn't want to have a whole application that hamstrung them to a route of doing things. They wanted to basically have the building blocks to do things. So I've written my own PIM. Why would I want PIM in the product? I just want a service to use it. Actually, I need a really fancy cart, or I need search. And hence the whole need for really the composable landscape of picking and choosing. So the transition, obviously, the businesses, you know, IBM changed. It changed its philosophy. Obviously, they sold that whole division, and that shows their philosophy and their change, because their focus is very much on AI and Watson and various other things now. And that went to what is now HCL Commerce. So those platforms still exist. There's clients who need them and use them. They generally tend to be more enterprise level. The entry level operations need people like the Commerce Tools, the Akinons, and Elastic Paths. Although in honesty, the Commerce Tools, they're now evolving into a far more sophisticated suite of microservices, and almost some people have termed it monolith of microservices, which helps to give more, Gartner's term is better, package business capability. So that gives you a bit of a feel. I could waffle on for hours on the topic, but that gives you a start.
No, yeah, but it's super interesting, because one of the things that I picked, and please correct me if I didn't get it right, is that you said that this was all driven. So, for example, IBM decided to get into this game because it was driven by the customer necessity. So they already had a customer, they had several customers, and the customer said, how about you build this e-com thing? So for us, a platform. So then they started developing this the platform. But then the question I have is, because in your profile it also says that you worked for AVNet, I don't know how you pronounced it, and then Cognizant, Avnet. These are agencies or ISVs, correct? Like,
Yeah.
which are part also of an ecosystem. Like in e-com, you have the agencies, but you also have the end customers, like larger enterprises. Sometimes they can work with agencies, sometimes they do it themselves, like they internalize the whole work. But when you were working at, going back to IBM those days, do you see that was, at the IBM days and Oracle days, the end customers, the enterprises, they also corroborated for the birth of the whole e-com ecosystem and agencies and stuff like that?
No, I don't think it was all from that. I think there was a lot of, when you look at the birth of e-commerce, and people talk a lot about Amazon and IBM and ATG being some of those early front runners to deliver product or functionality, and of course Amazon is very different as well. Where their philosophy came from was very much a retail centric view of the world. But you've got to think it was already being done. The birth of e-commerce happened in the 70s. Ironically, not long after I was born. Where things like the EDI, or electronic data interchange, was being used for the transfer of raw data between large organizations. So when people talk about the birth of B2B and B2B e-commerce now, B2B e-commerce was really where it all started. How do I make sure I get assured inventory and ensured pricing and goods transfer and being able to corroborate the delivery of said goods against what I've actually purchased in a procurement life cycle. So all those things were happening through those sort of things. And I think the bigger organizations, the people and people don't talk about it a lot now, at the front of the ship, it wasn't just IBM. Microsoft had their own e-commerce platform back then, which was purely .NET. And they decided to de-invest in it very early in the 2000s because it wasn't having the same traction, because most of the other platforms being born were Java-centric. So they decided it really wasn't for them, although there are now specialty .NET e-com platforms on the market. I think some of it has evolved from there. Other bits have evolved from necessity and need. But it is derived, the beauty of e-commerce, it is all derived from business need. And at the absolute core, when you look at things that have come up, social commerce, why? Because social interaction is becoming more and more important. Is it just that? No. Look at China. The whole market is driven on simple, easy, rapid collaboration through social networks. Nothing like the UK or the US, who are far, far behind that, even though we use it. So the fact that if I was Chinese, I would trust online to buy online with a single click through a social link, no problem. As a Brit, I'm still skeptical. Where's my data? Is it protected? Is my card? There's so there are other dynamics that play.
That's very interesting. One of the other things you spoke about, it's like programming languages. So C++, and you mentioned others like .NET. And I work for an e-com platform here from Denmark, small one, that was highly dependent on a larger CMS, which is called Umbraco. And my role there at the time was to do the business expansion, like into the Dutch market. So, my approach has always been content creation, because since the dependency was very high from that CMS, Umbraco, like many enterprises were adopting Umbraco, but they weren't necessarily ready to adopt WooCommerce. But that could be a natural move because we were already integrated in the system, right? But in order for that to happen, you need to be working on education, because the customers might not even know, right, that they needed commerce. And Umbraco serves a lot of, businesses from all walks of life, if you like, B2Bs and B2Cs and D2Cs, and because it's a content platform. Now, where I want to get with my question is, how do you see that e-com platforms, what's the future of e-com platforms today? Because it is a red market. So I've been talking to a company from Sweden. Their name is Centra, right? Not sure if you heard of them. Very interesting platform. And their whole proposition is to focus within fashion, lifestyle, and beauty. Then I think they have a chance, because otherwise, if you're just trying to say we're the best enterprise commerce platform, then good luck with Acunon or VTEX or Commerce Tools and whatnot. And so I like to ask you from a strategy perspective, how do you see the future of commerce platforms and positioning, really? Because it is a challenging market if you're just positioning yourself as any other commerce platform out there. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. The reality is, and the more software vendors I work for, the more it stays the same pretty much over the years. Everyone starts with this classification of what they call an ideal customer profile or an ICP, and that is really in majority based on the industries that business is best focused on. So if I look at most e-com vendors, you mentioned Centra there, I could put Acunon into exactly the same belt. Their heritage will be heavily B2C, and it will be either fashion or grocery, or and there are nuances across each of these. So doing fresh produce and goods is more complicated than selling apparel. Why? Because you've got to think of sell-by dates and weights and other things around, to your point, the data. Because e-commerce is all about data, really, at the core. So where do I see it going? The reality is that we are in a commoditized market. There must be, when I spoke to Gartner about 6-8 weeks ago, there's around about 160 discrete e-commerce platforms out on the market, from open source to the brand names we all know. The reality is that I think the evolution is going to come from the demand that we're seeing from the different industries. I'll highlight a couple of examples, some that are historic, that drive where my thoughts are going to, but also some that I'm seeing today. So when I think back to the early days of e-com and some of the clients I sort of forged my career working with, they were forged not on what I call traditional e-com platforms, ever. So I'll highlight two specifically. So I had the great fortune of doing some work with a large-scale petroleum organization called Total Fina. Well, at the time they'd just merged. It was Total, Fina, and Elf, the three petroleum organizations, and they merged. And they had a significant problem. Their problem was, how do I procure pump parts in the middle of an Alaskan field in a way where my engineers, who don't know anything about buying goods or procuring them or having them shipped, can fix a pump part quickly so the line keeps running? Because every second my line is down, I'm losing tens of millions of dollars. So why was it a problem? Because the engineers in the field would see a problem with a U-bend in a pipe, and they'd order the U-bend with the pump unit in it, and that would cost millions of dollars. And all they needed were 3 grommets and a screw, because they couldn't diagnose the problem. Now, the reality is, and it's heading to answering the question, what did we look at? Well, I spent time really scrutinizing back to data. How do you understand the configuration of the components within that pump part? What are the elements of it? What are the fragmentations? At that time, configurators were becoming an early discussion point in the world of e-commerce. So this is back in 2001, 2002. From that, what happened? We didn't implement a big e-commerce solution back to your point earlier, with the system integrator. The system integrator worked with us, worked around the problem with the client. And what we ended up doing was building a small e-com engine, a large data factory with some configuration, using a configurator that's now known in the market, which was new then, called Tacton, and then providing a ruggedized solution in a device that the engineer could say, look at the pump part, build the diagram, pick the piece.
Tacton is a CPQ solution, right? As they call it. Exactly.
Yeah. Today we call them CPQ. They're there. But why I'm using that as an example is generally we think as e-commerce as the sledgehammer to crack the nut. The reality is where we're going. Actually, Commerce Tools have got it pretty much right. The only thing is, I disagree that microservices are the solution to the problem of the universe, because they're not. And as a technician, microservices are an architectural pattern or a feature that you can use for good design. Doesn't mean the monolith is dead, but the discrete message is correct. I have a problem. I want to solve the problem. I don't want to buy a hammer to screw in a screw. So where the e-commerce market is going is, and I think it's going to happen more rapidly than people think, we're going to see a fragmentation of these platforms. Commerce Tools are in a good place, so are Elastic Path. Others are going to struggle because they've got the monoliths and you can't unpick them as easily. But people are going to ask, can I just have a cart? Can I have, more importantly, could I have a device that does A? So it's not just about the code. It's about the interacting point. It's about all the components, to Gartner's point, of a packaged business capability that can be delivered in isolation rapidly. More importantly, anywhere, anyhow. A really great example, an old CEO of mine gave me while I was talking to him on a similar topic. He said to me, where we're heading is into the utilities market. We provide the electricity. What we want is the ability to create the plugs that socket into the walls. And really, that's where e-com's going, in my view. And and this is where it's going to really break the boundaries also between, and I get really passionate on this, B2C, B2B, D2C, M2C, all these different wonderful buzzword bingos. It's commerce. And we need to solve the problem the client has in commerce, whether that's I want to trade with you as my partner or I want to sell to you as my consumer. It's all to do with the dynamic at the moment.
Fascinating. As you were talking, I used to remember, I worked closely with Mariano, the founder of VTEX. He was like a real mentor while we were doing the expansion in Romania and Central and Eastern Europe. And so he used to tell me that to work in commerce, the only way to do this is by having, like you, 20 years of experience. Because as you're saying, and if I'm understanding this correctly, like a platform is just the infrastructure, but then you need to understand about stocks, you need to understand about retail, you need to understand about sales, you need to understand about, there's a whole ecosystem there, right? Yep. In place. So when you have the conversations, you don't look just stupid in front of your customer or potential customer, because they know their stuff. And what I see in multiple occasions is people that are working in commerce, but they never really worked for a retailer. You know what I mean? Or they have never been in the trenches. So and maybe it's because the industry is desperate and they need to hire people because they have the demand. But that's where I want to get, like, building a career in commerce, and what's your view on this?
Yeah, it's very much an evolution, and I will sort of preempt what I'm going to say next with, I have been exceptionally lucky, and I do look at my career as I have had a number of moments in my career where luck has smiled on me, or opportunities have risen that I've been able to just grab. Now, this does mean there is risk, there is fear, there is concern at that time in your career. Should I? Shouldn't I? What if? The example of Total Female Health, I was a kid, new to e-commerce. I was working in IBM's product release division, and I was asked, could I just work with this client? And from it's built one of the strongest stories I've ever got. And my philosophy of e-commerce was built from that moment, because I didn't think of it like a retailer, because I was thinking about the problem, because I was a technician. That's what I was at the core. So I was trying to solve the problem for the client using the tools at my disposal. But as your career evolves, you're absolutely spot on. I've proactively made decisions to do certain things. For example, I was working with one of IBM's new partners at the time, and the Beijing Olympics were coming. I had the fortune of working with a little known wholesaler called Pentland Brands, But Pentland brands were built by actually acquiring and actually building a brand called Reebok and then selling it. And they now own and wholly own different brands, people like Speedo, Lacoste, Ted Baker, Red or Dead. And they're either licensee or they wholly own. And Speedo was one of their brands, and they had to do a socially immersive e-commerce experience for the Beijing Olympics, where it wasn't about selling goods like e-com, it was thinking like a wholesaler. I'm going to your point earlier, it's a beautiful segue, a content-rich experience with live streaming media. When Michael Phelps touched the end of the pool and at that last gold medal, his mother was in the stand with Andy Rubin, who's the owner of Pentland at the time, and they were dancing up and down when he got the medal. This was streamed live to all sorts of services globally out of the Chinese market, and this was run in China, so we had to think of Chinese networks. Then on from there, I realized very quickly, having done that with IBM, to your point, 17 years, I had a recruitment consultant ring me and say, you do know you're a lifer. And the realization struck. One, how good am I? How capable am I? How much do I know? I know IBM. I've, cut the boy, does he bleed blue type scenario. And I then proactively said, I've got to go back to school. Now, at that point, I was a very, very highly skilled technician. I was a consultant. I was leading big deals like Target and others for IBM, and really driving things through where clients were basically launching brand new sites based on my recommendations. But I went out, and where did I go? I went, to your point earlier, and I sort of didn't answer the question fully. I went to the system integrators. Why? Because the best way to do is to do. You can't teach it unless you know it. And I went into Ascendant Technology, who then became Avnet. I then went on from there to be freelance and be a freelance architect and spend a really enjoyable sort of 18 months with JD Sports and helping them on their transition and journey, which gave me and I did that deliberately because that gave me the opportunity to really work client side, be exclusively for them, even though I was a consultant working for them. And it gave me completely different insights to different problems. Why? The vendor wants to position and build a product that's ahead of the market, to sell to a market to help a customer solve a problem. The product will never solve all the problems. The SI is trying to solve all of the problems with the tools at their disposal within very tight cost restraints and ensuring they've got the right resources to do it. The client, let's say JD Sports, an example, need to keep the customers happy. They need to drive their revenues. And actually JD Sports is a great example. We're a very low margin based business. People don't perceive it, even though they have double digit growth through the period of time I worked with them. But they had a niche market and a focus on sports fashion. And as I moved on through those evolutions, from that point on, what you start to see in your career is, where is my true passion? Well, I'm at my very best vendor side. Why? Because I love product innovation, product strategy, product direction, looking at how that product then fits into the market. Ironically, the other side of the fence is I love customers. Why? Just like you and I are talking today, I learn more asking questions and getting answers back from clients than ever. This morning I deliberately am studying and building my skills in AI. Why? Because AI is going to be something that's going to change us forever. Is it going to be a negative thing? I don't think it is. I think it's going to be highly positive and it's going to make us more creative. But learning how to use that is more important. AI is not again the sledgehammer that's cracked the nut. It's the nuances of AI to enhance my business. And it's not all about retailers. A lot at the moment are thinking AI will help me to introspect my customers so that I can sell better products to my customers. Partially right. That's one philosophy of what AI can do. The other side of the fence is, and I was reading this recently, I think it's Porsche did a whole set of work around the hubcaps for their new lines of Porsches. And they used AI to generate the designs of these new hubcaps. Again, are they selling hubcaps? No, but this gives them a whole line of things that AI think might be visually really great representations of selling hubcaps. But what did it do? It gave the designers of the Porsches the ability to select from other ideas and then adapt it and change it to a design they want to put. This also is built from understanding that sort of market you want to go to, and also the future where you're coming. Ecom, there are so many different applications. ChatGPT is an obvious one because it's all about customer interaction, satisfaction, chatbots, making things more interactive. That's the obvious. There are far smarter things coming. You know, I liken back to an IBMism again. I always hark back to it. IBM were one of the first to actually launch into the product, into Web Sphere Commerce at the time when I was still there. This would have been, 2009? The first evolution of Watson into the whole business console. Now, it never really took off because it was too heavyweight and people didn't need it. But what did it do? It did introspective analytics, data mining based on the trends of people buying to then recommend to the merchandiser which product they should increase the rank on to then push into the search engine. So the e-commerce engine was doing it. Now, today, things like Algolia and other search engines are doing exactly that in introspective AI. Again, back to fragmentation. The more we look at the problems, and AI is going to drive this more as well, we're going to fragment components that are going to give us more introspection, which is going to help e-commerce evolve. And I think that's what it's going to do. It's not going to change or go away. It's going to go through a new evolution. And again, it's not a revolution, it's an evolution.
That's brilliant, Jamie. I mean, as you were saying, my brain was like with all of these ramifications. And I'm curious then, I actually, because when I introduced you to the group, you spoke about some of the customers. Oh, wow, something weird. And some of the customers that you work with. So perhaps you could, tell us a little bit about some of the use cases and results that you have throughout your career. If you can mention, that could be really nice. And then I want to ask you about, because you're going through also a process like myself. I'm using AI. I use ChatGPT in a few ways. So it's upskilling or reskilling ourselves, right? Which is true, right? If I don't understand a bit of ChatGPT, if I don't understand a bit of some AI tools and how that can enhance content production, creation, and stuff like that, and then you're going to be a few kilometers behind other people who are going to do this. And then to summarize our conversation later, I want to ask you about the professional of the future and how do you prepare. But perhaps if you can then first tell about some of the customer cases and things that you've done in your career, and then we speak about this reskilling part, because I think it's quite important. That would be great.
Sure. So I'll pick 2 or 3 examples of customers. I won't go through a whole list because I could go through things forever. And I've already mentioned Total Finger Elf as one example. The outcome of Total Finger Elf is that they implemented a solution that allowed them to drive down the cost of procurement of parts in the field. And it saved them tens of millions of dollars, because effectively the engineers were able, using what we now call CPQ, or predominantly the configurator part of it, to really introspect very, very quickly and do root cause analysis of problems. In the case of Speedo, Speedo saw significant increases of sales. Now, the reason this is a really important and prevalent message that I want to deliver here is Speedo were doing what I call now subliminal selling. There was no product positioned anywhere on any of the content sites. Why? Because they were swimming community sites. They were Speedo brand affiliate sites. There were all sorts of things about the brand, about the community, about swimmers, about expert skills. So they were going to large scale swimming clubs who were training the Michael Phelpses of the future. But the message and the thing that I learned from it, which was hugely powerful, is how many people use that rich media then, and even more so now. It's on steroids now compared to what it was in the Speedo in the Beijing Olympics. And it drove up the Michael Phelps fast suit sales by over 200% in a matter of minutes. Nowadays, we're talking about seconds the sales are going up. The other ones that probably spring to mind that are interesting use case scenarios. I had the great privilege to actually have a pocket skill of managing critical situations. And I was flown out to a little known place in Finland called Jyväskylä back in the day. And the client was having all sorts of problems. And this is a counter example to the big monoliths, where smaller organizations pride themselves on detailed customer satisfaction all the time. The bigger boys can't always treat the smallest clients in the right way. And I flew out to this client called Metso. I didn't even know who they were. Large pulp and paper organization, sold all pretty much. They were the biggest supplier of pulp and paper and wood goods to the United Kingdom, as an example. And they were having all sorts of problems with their technology platform. So I spent I spent a week there on site with them, firstly apologizing that they weren't treated better. But then secondly, really working through the problems they faced, not just on how they positioned and understood goods, but how they used the IBM technology. And at that time, it wasn't just about commerce. It was about the new evolutions of things that we use today, like SharePoint, which is portals. The last example I'll probably give is the Arcadia Group. And the Arcadia Group, I deliberately pick it as a diverse option to the others. The others are very much around innovation and forward growth and trying to help a client through certain problems. With Arcadia, I was with Cognizant at the time, and I was parachuted into their organization at the last minute because they had a very, very bad Black Friday the year before I joined. And they were seeing really significant problems, and they'd had significant management changes at the time to try and sort out and resolve the problems. The one thing that I did with Arcadia was I spent a lot of time honing how Cognizant approached the problem of the retail delivery for Web2 commerce. I worked through with the client very carefully how they would actually manage and prepare for Black Friday, and also ensure that everything was stabilized. And it taught me a big lesson, because I wasn't particularly popular. I wasn't popular with some of the Arcadia senior management because I said things as they were, and we didn't necessarily get on eye to eye. But my job was to make sure that they went through peak with no problems. And the year before, they'd had significant outages, losing millions of pounds. By the time that I'd spent my time with them, I'd honed and tuned the Cognizant team. We'd managed to actually get full code freezes in place before the October watershed, yet still give the digital director at the time the ability to add new changes into that release. And more importantly, they went through Black Friday with 0 outages, increased revenues, and also the site and the systems were performing within the tolerances you'd expect. So they were running under at 75%. So the whole thing had to cover the infrastructure and everything. So it was I won't take all the credit. It was a team event, and Arcadia had to put a huge amount of time in themselves to make sure it was successful. But I really pride myself on the fact that I was parachuted into that late and was still able to help and advise and direct and make sure we sort of rounded the edges, for better term, to make sure they were successful and drive their revenues. So that's the SI side.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, sorry, but I have a question about this. It's going to be quick, but how important do you think it is for an SI or a professional like in commerce to be opinionated? Because some customers, they buy on the idea that they need composable when they might need a few adjustments. And if you tell them, sir, you're wrong, politely, however you're going to put it, you don't need it, you might run the risk of losing that customer, right, for the organization. And because they also have their interests in writing off technology for whatever reason it is, you know what I mean, right? So
I understand completely.
The politics and all of that,
It is, and it's a very, in honesty with you, Carlos, and you know this, it's a very, very fine line you walk, and it is about building. I always talk about building the right to challenge, and it's about building trust, and trust is never given, it's earned. Same as respect. And one of the things I learned, and maybe this is part of the IBMer in me. IBM's ethos when they train solution consultants or pre-sales people was you have to become the trusted technical advisor. You know, and that has stuck with me. And I do profoundly believe that as a trusted advisor, and I don't care whether I'm trying to sell software, whether I'm positioning a solution, I have a duty of care. And that duty of care is not unidirectional. And sometimes people forget this. They seem to think that their duty of care is to sell software for the company or to win an implementation for the company, whatever the cost may be. That may be cut the cost of the software, reduce the cost of the implementation. The great one I've seen today, you know, Michael Vex commented on LinkedIn on somebody's comment about training. On more occasions than enough, I see projects where training is removed from the budget and actually completely removed from the project. And at the end of the day, the client doesn't know how to use what they're using because they're not trained. And you can't train on the job. So to your point, I take it very seriously that I have a duty of care to challenge. Now, I believe that you challenge with fact. You cannot just arbitrarily say, you know what, Carlos, the way you've got to do things is use AI. But why? Because I told you so, and I know. That's just rubbish. And I know it still happens. But you've got to have a modicum of fact. The other thing sometimes, and using the Arcadia example is a really great one, you know, I have a huge amount of respect for Jamie Overton, who was the director of e-commerce for Arcadia at the time. A very, very talented, exceptional leader, really knew what he had to do under a very difficult set of situations. And Jamie and I, on a number of occasions, didn't come eye to eye. But when I left that relationship at the end, did I have less respect for him when he told me I was wrong or he didn't want to do what I wanted him to do? No. And vice versa, I don't feel when I stood in front of him and said, you don't do it that way. If you do it that way, you'll fail. I was wrong. If he chose to do it a different way, again, the client has the final choice. But I do believe strongly that if you don't truly inform people, now, okay, if you're, you know, and I've been there, I've gone in, been a bull in a china shop and been wrong, you know, every human being, you know, but sometimes it's better to actually take a risk and challenge the norm and say it, just expect to be challenged in return. So I do believe you've got to have a voice. And the more we actually do that to each other, the more we learn.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Yeah, the final question about the professional of the future and what do you think you need to do in terms of education, like to be, you know?
Yeah, I think that's one I'm struggling with right now. I think it's definitely you've got to try and be current. You've got to rethink. And a number of times in my career, I've done this. So I evolved from being a developer into an architect. I learned different products. Right now, where I stand, if I want to purely stay in the e-commerce space, I've got to not look at what I've done and what I've learned from what I've done, but look at where is the market going and where is the most important place for my skill set. Because I'm a technician at the core, the obvious places is looking at things like, how are we going to use AI? How are we going to transform data consumption? How are we going to look at proliferating more rich and informed content in a better way to help me sell better or position better? Again, with that technical foundation beneath it. So as that sort of alludes to, I'm spending a lot of time looking at those areas. Does it mean going off and reading 93 analyst reports? Not necessarily. I also think that the world is changing very strongly, and I've got to come up to a more modern state. Now, one of my, and I haven't sort of highlighted this so far, but I'll mention it in passing because I always try and hide it in the background. I've fought my whole career with two big problems, to be honest. And one of them I no longer face, which is I look a lot younger than my years. When I was younger, it was a real problem to stand up to very experienced people and then say, you're a kid, go away. When I was actually in my 30s at the time, with a lot of experience behind me, and they said, well, no, you're about 10, aren't you? Yeah, right, okay. You know, and to this day, you know, people say it now, you know, I'm 50 now. And genetically, I'm very lucky. I don't look 50, but that is not necessarily a huge advantage. The other one, which I think is more profound, that's more jocular, that the one that I find more profound is I have dyslexia. And I fought it through school, through college, through university. And one of the reasons I don't post prolifically online is because I'm nervous of it. I do writing. I do release certain documents. I do things occasionally. That's why I went and wrote the Red Book with IBM, is to try and face that fear and keep working. But the reason I use that as an example, and there are a lot of people like me in the world who are very talented but have disabilities or things that mean that they hold back on giving to the community. And this is a great example of how you give back and talk to people. Is what I'm starting to realize is my dyslexia is sort of a crutch that I have to lean on for the rest of my life. Why? Because I can't get rid of it. It's like a part of my body I can never get rid of. But the reality is that learning and understanding more about AI, using things like dictation tools and other things, can help me to hone this and help me to then provide the knowledge I've got to the community. This is another big thing in the e-commerce community we've got to do. There are lots and lots of experienced people, and that knowledge needs to be shared, because otherwise there's going to be knowledge that's lost that we're going to be relearning. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that and how I can use tools to then do that and teach and grow and help to evolve, not just clients, but vendors and everyone I sort of touch, because I do believe very strongly that we learn from each other.
It's beautiful, Jamie. Thanks for sharing that last part. It's an amazing cut. I really liked it. And so if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
You can contact me directly on LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time. They can reach out to me via email, which we can post so they can get their email. And I've got my personal phone number that I can share as well, if need be.
Brilliant. So that was Jamie Smith. Thanks, Jamie. See you next
Carl.
time.
See you next time.
Okay, so end the stream now, and